In the bustling city of New York, amidst the noise of traffic and the rush of people, a man sat quietly in a small, cluttered laboratory. This man, Alex Carter, was far from what most would consider a hero. He was an ordinary human. A scientist, yes, but not one with any special powers or abilities. He had no military training, no impressive combat skills. He was just a man with a keen mind and an unyielding curiosity. Alex wasn't rich, nor was he famous. He didn't have an army at his back or any allies in high places. He was just one of many people lost in the crowd, living a life filled with the everyday struggles of work, family, and survival. But that day, everything was about to change. Little did Alex know that he was about to step into a situation no one could have predicted. He had been working late on a project, one that many thought was impossible. It wasn't about space exploration or making breakthroughs in medicine. No, Alex was obsessed with something else. Time. The way it moved, how it could be measured, and whether it could be controlled. It seemed like a crazy idea, even to Alex. But the more he worked, the more convinced he became that time wasn't just something that passed by. It was something that could be manipulated. The idea started small. He had heard rumors about people who had felt time slow down during moments of extreme stress. Some claimed that they could almost freeze a moment in their mind, stretching seconds into what felt like hours. Was it possible? Could time, a constant, ever-moving force, actually be altered? It wasn't long before Alex began his experiments. The tools he used were nothing special, just a few machines to measure energy and light, and a large old clock he found in the back of his lab. He focused on the clock at first, hoping to slow its hands down or stop them entirely. Days passed, and nothing worked. But Alex refused to give up. Then, late one night, when everything seemed hopeless, Alex did something different. Instead of using his machines, he simply closed his eyes and focused. He thought about time, not just how it passed, but how it felt. He pictured it as a river flowing endlessly, like a stream of water moving from one point to another, never stopping. He thought to himself, what if I could change the current? As he thought about it, a strange sensation washed over him. It was like his mind was connecting with something outside of himself. He felt lighter, almost as if he were floating. And then, everything stopped. Alex's eyes snapped open in confusion. The soft hum of the machines around him had gone silent. The faint tick of the clock was no longer audible. His hands, resting on the desk, didn't move. His breath caught in his throat, but it didn't escape. He looked around. Everything was frozen. The world had stopped. His first thought was that he had somehow fallen asleep, and this was just a dream. But as he stood up and walked around the lab, he realized it was not a dream. Time had stopped completely. His heart raced as he moved around the room, taking in the stillness around him. Even the dust particles in the air were frozen in mid-flight. What was happening? How was this possible? Alex's mind raced with questions, but the most pressing one remained. What could he do with this power? He walked to the window and looked outside. The streets below were empty, with no cars or people moving. Even the trees in the park across the street stood motionless. For a moment, Alex just stared, trying to understand what had occurred. But then, something strange happened. He thought about time moving forward again. Just as quickly as it had stopped, the world around him began to move once more. The clock's hands ticked, the sound of the machines returned, and the dust settled. Alex exhaled in relief, not realizing he had been holding his breath. But this time, something felt different. He had done it. He had stopped time, and then restarted it. His mind was buzzing with the possibilities. He had just unlocked something no one else in history had ever done. He had become the first human to manipulate time itself. It didn't make sense. Alex was just a scientist, a man who spent most of his days buried in research papers and books. He wasn't supposed to be capable of this kind of power. And yet, here he was, standing at the precipice of something unimaginable. Time had always been thought of as something that couldn't be changed, something beyond human control. But now, Alex had broken that rule. The universe had just witnessed the impossible. And no one, not even Alex, knew what would happen next. As the initial shock wore off, Alex began to realize the enormity of what he had just done. Could he control it? What if he made a mistake? What if time froze forever? Or worse, what if it collapsed entirely? He had no answers, just more questions. But the one thing he did know was that his life, no, the entire world, would never be the same again. The power to stop time was something beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of, and Alex Carter was the one who had discovered it. But what would he do with this power? Would he try to use it for good, or would he fall victim to the temptation of controlling time? And perhaps more importantly, would the universe even let him keep it? For now, Alex stood in his lab, the weight of the discovery heavy on his shoulders. The world outside was unchanged, but inside, Alex knew that he had just crossed a line that no one could ever uncross. Time was in his hands, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after his extraordinary discovery, Alex Carter woke with a heavy heart. His mind swirled with thoughts of the previous night, of halting time, of standing still in a world frozen in place. It had been the most surreal experience of his life. It felt like something that belonged in the pages of a science fiction novel, not something that a humble scientist like him should have been able to accomplish. But the reality was undeniable. He had done it. The clock on his wall ticked away, as if reminding him that life was continuing on, even though his mind still refused to fully process the power he had unlocked. He walked around his apartment, half expecting to find some trace of the world he had left behind. Yet everything seemed the same. The mug on his desk was still there, the pile of papers untouched. The only thing different was him. The only thing that had changed was the way he saw the world. Time, a force that had always been beyond human control, was now within his grasp. A wave of excitement and dread swept over him. What could he do with this newfound power? He could stop time whenever he wanted, control the flow of the universe itself. The implications were staggering, but the questions were just as staggering. Would it be safe? Was it even right to tamper with something as fundamental as time? He knew he had to test it again. He couldn't just leave it like this. He needed to understand it, to control it. The curiosity burned within him, and despite the doubts creeping in, Alex couldn't stop himself. He had to see what else was possible. Sitting at his desk, he closed his eyes and focused, just as he had the night before. His breath steadied as his mind tuned into the vibrations of the world. There was a strange hum in the air, a subtle force he had never noticed before. He reached out with his thoughts, searching for the moment in time where he could freeze everything. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a flicker of thought, he felt it again, a sensation of everything around him stopping. It wasn't just the objects in his room that froze this time. The entire world had come to a halt once more. The birds outside his window, mid-flight, hovered in place. The light streaming through the curtains froze in midair, suspended in time. Alex's heart raced with exhilaration. He was doing it again. He had power, real power, at his fingertips. He let out a breath, amazed by the sheer possibility of it all. He could now explore the frozen world, make changes, observe things that no human had ever been able to do. But as he marveled at his newfound abilities, a creeping thought nagged at him. What would happen if he lost control? What if, in his attempts to manipulate time, he inadvertently created a disaster? The universe had its rules, its own natural flow. Could he really bend it without consequences? The question plagued him as he walked around the frozen city outside. Cars were halted in mid-traffic. People were frozen mid-step, their faces locked in expressions of whatever thoughts they were having in that brief moment. Alex was able to approach one of the people, a woman in a hurry, her body caught in mid-stride, as if she had been frozen in the middle of a conversation. He studied her face, Her expression was frozen in a state of shock. He wondered if he could make changes to their movements, maybe adjust their expressions, or stop them from interacting altogether. The possibilities were endless. He could correct mistakes, prevent accidents, or even save lives. Then, a darker thought crossed his mind. What if he used this power for personal gain? What if he manipulated time for his own advantage? Could he stop a disaster, win the lottery, or become the richest man in the world? The temptation was there, but Alex quickly shoved the thought aside. This power wasn't meant to be a tool for selfish gain. He had to keep it under control. He had to understand the full extent of what he was doing. The last thing he wanted was to be responsible for causing something worse than what he was trying to prevent. With a determined breath, he decided to stop the experiment for the day. As much as he wanted to continue, the weight of the responsibility was overwhelming. Time wasn't something to play with. He would need to think carefully about the next steps. Just as he began to think about returning to his lab, something caught his attention. In the distance, a bright flash filled the sky, visible even through the frozen cityscape. Alex's heart skipped a beat. Something was happening, something that was beyond his control. The flash quickly faded, but Alex was already moving. As he started walking toward the source of the light, a new sense of urgency filled his mind. He had just discovered the ability to stop time, but there were bigger forces at play now. What had caused that flash? Was it related to his newfound powers? And what did it mean for the universe? The human mind was not meant to hold this kind of power, and Alex was starting to realize that his discovery had just scratched the surface. The consequences of what he had unlocked could be far greater than he had ever imagined. As he moved toward the source of the strange flash, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something that knew what he had done, and what he was capable of doing next. Alex moved swiftly through the frozen world, his feet tapping against the cold, motionless pavement. The city was eerily still, the air thick with silence. Even the wind had been halted, frozen in time. It was as if the entire universe had paused, awaiting his next move. The bright flash he had seen earlier still lingered in his mind. It had been like a beacon, something calling to him. His curiosity pushed him forward. It was as if something or someone out there knew about his newfound power. He couldn't shake the feeling that his discovery wasn't an accident, that there was something far bigger happening beneath the surface. The world around him had been frozen in time for what felt like hours. His footsteps echoed, though they seemed muted in the unnatural stillness. He arrived at the location where he had seen the flash. It was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building stood tall, but the paint had peeled, and the windows were long shattered. It had once been a hub for industry, now left to rot in the quiet of time. He approached the warehouse cautiously, unsure of what he might find inside. What had caused that flash? Could it be connected to his power? And if so, who or what was behind it? There was no way he could ignore the possibilities anymore. Every instinct in his body screamed that something important awaited him inside. The large metal door was ajar, hanging loosely on its rusted hinges. As Alex pushed it open, a strange energy pulsed through the air, a faint hum, barely perceptible, but undeniable. It was as if the building itself was alive, reacting to his presence. His pulse quickened. Inside, the warehouse was dark, but a strange glow illuminated the far corner. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward. There, suspended in the middle of the room, was an object he couldn't quite comprehend. It looked like a large crystal, pulsing with a soft blue light, surrounded by intricate symbols carved into the floor. The symbols seemed familiar, but he couldn't place them. They were not human, that much was clear. They had the appearance of an ancient language, something far older than anything Alex had encountered in his studies. As he approached the crystal, the air around him grew colder, and the hum grew louder. The energy from the crystal felt almost tangible, like a magnetic force pulling him closer. His mind raced. Was this the source of the flash he had seen? Was this connected to the strange ability he had discovered? Alex reached out tentatively, his hand trembling as he drew closer to the glowing crystal. The moment his fingers touched its surface, a sudden shock ran through his body, a shock that sent his heart racing and his mind spinning. The crystal seemed to pulse with energy, its light growing brighter. And then, just as suddenly, the room was engulfed in a blinding flash. When the light faded, Alex found himself kneeling on the cold floor. His body ached, his vision blurry. For a moment, he thought he had lost consciousness, but when he opened his eyes, everything had changed. The room was still the same, just as it had been when he first entered. But the feeling in the air was different. He could feel something, a presence, watching him. It was a quiet, powerful force, something far beyond his understanding. His pulse quickened, and he rose shakily to his feet. "You're not alone," a voice whispered in his mind. The voice was not his own. It was ancient and deep, filled with power. Alex froze, his breath catching in his throat. He looked around the room, but there was no one there. The only thing that existed in the space was the crystal, and yet he knew he wasn't alone. Who are you?" Alex whispered, his voice trembling with fear and wonder. The voice responded, not in words, but in feelings, impressions, images, and sensations that flooded his mind all at once. It was as if the very essence of the crystal was speaking to him, sending visions of distant worlds, ancient civilizations, and forgotten histories. The crystal was not just a power source. It was alive. "You have awakened me," the voice echoed in his mind, now clearer than ever. "You are the one who has the power to control time." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The voice wasn't just speaking to him, it was acknowledging him. The power he had discovered wasn't his own creation. It had been there all along, waiting to be unlocked. And now something ancient and powerful had noticed him. He was no longer just a curious scientist. He was something more, something important. "What do you want from me?" Alex asked, his voice filled with awe and fear. "I do not seek to control you," the voice replied, "but I offer you a choice. You may continue down the path of power you have unlocked, but be warned. The forces that will come for you will not be merciful. Time is not a tool to be wielded lightly." Alex felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He could sense the weight of the warning. The universe was vast, and there were forces in it that had been around far longer than humanity ever could understand. And now, those forces knew of his power. The future, once uncertain, now felt incredibly fragile. "You must decide," the voice said. "What will you do with this power? What will you become?" Alex took a deep breath. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The choices before him were both exhilarating and terrifying. But for the first time, he realized something. He wasn't just a witness to this grand cosmic game. He was a player in it. The game had just begun. Alex couldn't shake the strange, unsettling feeling that had taken hold of him since the crystal had spoken. His mind buzzed with the ancient voice's words. "The forces that will come for you will not be merciful." It echoed in his thoughts, a constant reminder that his discovery was far from a blessing. He was not merely a bystander in this cosmic web. He had become the center of a conflict far greater than anything he could have imagined. He walked slowly through the warehouse, the weight of what he had just experienced pressing on his chest. The world outside seemed so normal, so unaffected by what had just happened. Yet, Alex knew that this was a lie. Something had shifted. The forces that were now aware of him were not bound by the same rules as he was. They had existed for millennia, and they would come. His eyes were drawn to the crystal once more. It stood in the middle of the room, glowing softly in the dark. Its presence had changed. It wasn't just a powerful object anymore. It felt like something, or someone, was watching him, as though the crystal itself was alive and aware of every move he made. A sudden noise from outside broke his thoughts, a faint rumble, like a ship's engine idling in the distance. Alex's instincts screamed at him to leave. He turned and bolted for the door, not waiting for his mind to catch up with the urgency in his body. The moment his hand touched the door handle, the faint hum he had felt earlier grew louder, and his head throbbed with a dull pain. The ship had arrived. Outside, the night was still, but the air was thick with tension. In the distance, the soft light of a craft shimmered. It wasn't human. Alex could tell that much instantly. The silhouette of the ship was unlike anything he had seen. Sleek, metallic, and adorned with symbols he didn't recognize. It was alien, its design too advanced for anything from Earth. Panic started to rise within him. The forces that the crystal had warned him about had arrived. They were here, and they were coming for him. With his heart pounding, Alex backed into the warehouse, slamming the door shut. He couldn't let them find him here. The crystal had made it clear that his power had attracted attention, and whatever was coming now, it wasn't here for a friendly chat. His mind raced for a plan. He knew he couldn't fight whatever was coming. They had the advantage. Advanced technology, knowledge of the universe. But Alex had something they didn't. The power to control time. If he could just figure out how to harness it fully, maybe he could turn the tide. But how? A sudden thought hit him like a bolt of lightning. What if I can stop them? He had frozen time before. Perhaps he could do it again. But this time, he needed to think bigger. He couldn't just stop a few moments. He needed to stop the entire ship. Alex focused, trying to calm the chaos in his mind. His breaths were shallow, but he had to keep his focus. Time was an invisible force, one that surrounded everything. It was everywhere, in every particle, in every movement. He could feel it, taste it, waiting for him to take control. Slowly, he reached out with his mind. He pictured time stretching out before him, like a rubber band ready to snap back. He needed to understand it, to manipulate it. The pressure was building, the energy around him growing thick with potential. He could almost taste the air, so dense with the weight of time itself. A sharp crack split the air, and suddenly, time stopped. Everything around him froze. Motionless. The rumble of the alien ship's engines ceased. The lights of the city blinked and then hung still in the dark sky. The wind, which had been whispering through the trees, came to a sudden halt. It was as if the world had simply ceased to exist in motion. Alex stood alone in the frozen world, his thoughts racing. He had done it. He had stopped time. But now came the hard part, making sure that he could control it long enough to get away. He couldn't stay here forever. There was still too much to figure out. As he began to walk toward the ship, still suspended in time, he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. He wasn't alone in this. The alien ship had been aware of his presence long before he stopped time. They had been waiting for him to reveal himself. And now that he had shown his hand, they would come for him. He could feel the weight of their gaze, like invisible eyes watching his every move, sensing his power. The ship loomed large in front of him, frozen in midair. It was a daunting sight, but Alex knew this was his only chance to confront whatever was coming. He stepped forward, his mind racing, calculating every possible outcome. The time he had frozen was running out, and he needed to act quickly. He had to find a way to turn the tide in his favor before they could strike. As he approached the ship, the crystal's voice echoed in his mind once more. "You are not alone, Alex. There are others who seek to control you. Do not trust the first forces you face. There is more at play here than you realize." The words rang in his head, a cryptic warning that filled him with a sense of dread. Whoever had sent the ship was only the beginning. There was something else out there, something much more powerful, much more dangerous. Alex had only just begun to scratch the surface of a much larger conflict. But one thing was clear: his world would never be the same again. Alex's mind raced as he stood in front of the frozen alien ship, now completely still in midair. It was an eerie sight, an entire vessel, suspended like a strange monument in time, waiting for him. But despite the calm that enveloped the world around him, Alex could feel the tension growing inside him. He wasn't sure how long he could hold time still. He had to act fast. He took a deep breath and approached the ship, his eyes scanning its sleek, polished surface. The craftsmanship was beyond anything human-made, with smooth curves and an almost organic look, as though it had been grown rather than constructed. Glowing symbols ran along its hull, and the air seemed to hum with energy. Alex was in awe, but also fearful. This was no ordinary alien ship. It was ancient, and its presence signaled something far greater than he understood. His heart pounded as he placed a hand on the ship's cold surface. The second his fingers touched it, the crystal inside him pulsed, sending waves of energy coursing through his body. A deep, ancient voice spoke in his mind again, clearer this time. "You are not ready, Alex. This vessel was never meant for you." The voice was not the crystals. It was something else. A warning, but also a command. Alex pulled his hand back, confused. What did that mean? The ship wasn't meant for him. Was it because of his power over time? He looked up, trying to peer through the frozen air to see inside the ship. His pulse quickened. This was too much for him to understand in such a short amount of time. He had to make a decision. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing. He had to think. He couldn't be swayed by the warnings or the strange messages. This was his chance to turn the tables. If he could somehow take control of the ship, then maybe, just maybe, he could protect Earth from whatever threats were coming. Suddenly, the stillness of the frozen world began to shift. The crystal inside him flared to life again. The voice of the alien ship spoke directly into his mind, overriding everything else. "Do not resist, human. You are unprepared. This vessel and the power it holds are beyond your comprehension." Alex stumbled back, a cold sweat forming on his forehead. The ship, it was alive. Not only was it a machine, but it also had a consciousness, a will of its own. As if sensing his thoughts, the ship's lights began to pulse, and the once still air seemed to hum louder with energy. The frozen moment began to slip away, as if the ship was shaking off the time-stopping power Alex had imposed. He clenched his fists. "No," he thought, "I won't let go." But the ship's resistance was stronger than he had anticipated. Time around him, which had been frozen just moments before, began to tick again. Slowly at first, then rapidly, until everything around him started to blur. The world began to move forward. Panicking, Alex focused harder, trying to hold on to the frozen moment. He couldn't allow time to unfreeze. But just as quickly as he had controlled it, the time barrier cracked, breaking open with a force that knocked him backward. He tumbled to the ground as the ship's systems hummed to life, the symbols on its hull glowing brighter. The world around him was no longer frozen. The alien ship had broken through his time lock, and the fight for control had just begun. Alex groaned, pushing himself up. His body was shaking, but he refused to let it stop him. He had to learn how to use his power to its fullest. He couldn't back down now. He had come too far. A soft, resonating voice filled the air around him, but it was not in his mind this time. This voice was real, coming from the ship. "You are a fool, human. You cannot wield what you do not understand. We warned you." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He stood, fists clenched, facing the ship. His breath quickened. This wasn't just an alien ship anymore. It was a living entity, one that had been designed to keep its secrets, and now it was speaking to him. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of his mind, but he couldn't let it control him. He had come too far. The warnings, the voices, the strange powers, it was all a puzzle, and he was going to solve it, no matter the cost. But now something else was happening. The ship was not alone. Behind it, in the distance, more lights began to appear. More ships, ships with designs even more intricate than the one in front of him. The fleet was here, and it wasn't just to observe. They were here for him. The crystal pulsed again, this time with a different energy. It felt urgent. He looked at it, his mind racing, and for the first time, he realized he wasn't just a passive player in this game. He had become the center of something far larger, something that could either save or destroy everything he knew. The fleet, the ship, the crystal, everything was connected. And now, Alex had to make a choice. Run, fight, or something else entirely. The choice wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. Alex's journey was only just beginning. Alex stood frozen, staring at the darkening sky as the fleet of alien ships approached. The once tranquil atmosphere now felt like a ticking clock, each second passing with a sense of urgency. He could hear the low hum of the ships, almost as if they were alive, as they descended toward Earth. The ship he had tried to control, the one he had touched with his mind, trying to harness its power, was now fully awakened. The glowing symbols on its hull pulsed like a heartbeat, sensing with the rhythm of Alex's own heart. He felt a strange connection to it, a bond, and for a moment, he wondered if this ship had chosen him, or if he had simply forced himself into something much larger than he could understand. But there was no time for answers. The fleet was nearing, and the voices from the ship were growing louder in his mind. You cannot escape your fate, human. You have awakened the Guardians. There is no turning back. The words sent a chill down his spine. Guardians, what were they? Why had he been chosen, or cursed, with this power over time? His thoughts raced, but there was no time for answers. The ships were almost upon them. He could see the shapes of the alien vessels, massive and ominous, casting long shadows over the earth below. They were unlike anything humans had ever seen, smooth, otherworldly designs that seemed to distort the very air around them. Each ship was larger than a city, each one a potential weapon, capable of destroying entire worlds with a single command. The air grew thick with tension, the atmosphere charged with an energy he could barely comprehend. Alex took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, trying to control the panic that threatened to rise inside him. This was not just a battle for Earth, it was a battle for his very soul. The alien fleet slowly encircled the Earth, a ring of metal and power that seemed to choke the very sky. Each ship was silent, its intentions unclear, but their presence was undeniable. Alex could feel the weight of their gaze, even from where he stood on the ground. He took another step forward, and that's when the ground beneath him began to shake. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something much more ominous. The vibration grew stronger, and the hum of the alien ships increased, as though they were preparing for something. Then a voice boomed in his mind. It was not the voice of the ship, but something far older, something far more powerful. You stand at the precipice, human. Your world is not your own. You have disturbed the balance. You have awakened the Guardians, and now you must face them. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alex clenched his fists, refusing to show fear. He had no choice now. He had to fight. If the Earth was to survive, he had to confront whatever force lay behind these alien Guardians. As if responding to the voice, the ships began to move, their sleek forms cutting through the sky with impossible speed. They didn't attack. At least not yet. They circled, observing, as if they were waiting for something. For him. The crystal in his chest pulsed again, stronger this time, and for the first time, Alex could sense its true power. It was like an endless well of energy, but it wasn't just raw power. It was the key to understanding everything. Time, space, reality, it all bent to his will. He could feel it, but controlling it was another matter entirely. He closed his eyes, focusing. He tried to pull on the energy from the crystal, but the ships, no, the Guardians, weren't letting him. They were blocking his access to the full potential of the crystal, preventing him from using its power. He could feel their presence, like an impenetrable wall, standing between him and the answers he so desperately sought. Then, a sudden rush of air cut through the tension. A figure descended from one of the alien ships, floating effortlessly toward the ground. Alex's eyes widened as the figure landed in front of him. It was an alien, but unlike any he had seen before, tall and imposing, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. The creature's skin shimmered like liquid silver, and its armor was sleek and smooth, almost as if it had been molded from the stars themselves. The alien spoke, its voice a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. "You are the one who has disturbed the peace, human. You have awakened forces that should have remained dormant. The Guardians will not let your world survive this transgression." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't understand. What were the Guardians? Why had he been the one chosen to stop them? Or was it too late to stop them now? "The choice is yours," the alien said, its voice now cold, calculating. "You can join us, or face the consequences of your defiance." Alex looked into the alien's eyes, searching for any hint of mercy, of a way out. But all he saw was coldness. These beings were ancient, powerful, and they didn't care about Earth. They were here for one thing: to reclaim what they had lost, and that meant destroying everything in their path. The alien's eyes narrowed as it took a step forward. "What will you choose, human?" The tension in the air was unbearable. Time seemed to slow as Alex stood at the crossroads of destiny. He could feel the power of the crystal pulsing inside him, begging to be unleashed. But he knew that doing so could cost everything. His choice would determine the future of Earth, of the galaxy, and of his own soul. Alex took a deep breath, looking back at the fleet above him. There was no turning back now. The alien stood before Alex, its eyes glowing with an unearthly intensity. The silent hum of the Guardian's fleet echoed around them, filling the air with an oppressive weight. Alex could feel the energy building inside him, like an explosive force ready to break free. He had been chosen for something greater, something beyond his understanding. But was he ready to wield such power? "The time has come," the alien said, its voice as cold as the stars. "You will make the ultimate choice, your world or ours. You cannot have both." Alex swallowed hard, his heart racing. The enormity of the situation threatened to overwhelm him. He was only a mechanic, a simple human. And yet, somehow, he had become the key to everything. He wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. He was fighting for his own existence and the fate of the entire galaxy. "You cannot stop us," the alien added. "The Guardians are too powerful. Even your kind, with its newfound strength, cannot defy what is inevitable." The words stung, but Alex refused to let them break him. He wasn't some helpless being anymore. He had the crystal, the power of time itself coursing through his veins. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was something far more dangerous, something the galaxy had never seen before. The weight of the choice was suffocating. He could sense the alien's intention to destroy him, to make an example out of the one human who had dared to stand against them. But he also understood something deeper now. He had a responsibility. To Earth, to his people. He couldn't let fear control him, couldn't let the weight of the unknown dictate his actions. "I won't join you," Alex said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos raging within him. "I will protect Earth, and I will stop you." A cold silence followed his words, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. The alien's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something. A recognition, perhaps, that flashed in its glowing eyes. It had underestimated him. And now, it was too late. The crystal inside Alex's chest pulsed again, stronger than before. It was responding to his resolve, feeding off his defiance. A wave of energy surged from him, and for the first time, Alex felt as though he had complete control over it. The power of time, the ability to freeze, bend, and manipulate time itself, was his. And he wasn't afraid to use it. The alien's eyes widened as Alex raised his hand, a surge of energy rippling through the air. Time itself began to slow. The massive fleet above them, once so intimidating, now seemed to be caught in a slow-motion dance. Ships that were once moving with blinding speed were now frozen in place, suspended in midair like ancient statues. The alien took a step back, stunned. It tried to move, but its limbs refused to obey. Alex's control over time was absolute. He had done the impossible. You cannot." The alien stammered, its voice no longer steady. But Alex wasn't listening anymore. His focus was solely on what needed to be done. In a moment of clarity, Alex saw the truth. The Guardians had been hiding something from him. Their power came not from their ships, not from their weapons, but from the very fabric of time itself. They had mastered it, but they had never truly understood its dangers. With a final, decisive thought, Alex shifted the flow of time around him, reversing it to the moment when the alien fleet had first appeared. Everything shifted as if the universe itself were taking a step back, rewinding to a time before the threat had even been felt. The ships began to fade, slowly disintegrating into nothingness, as if they were never meant to exist in this timeline at all. The alien, now a mere shadow of its former self, let out a final desperate cry before it too faded away into the ether. Alex released his grip on time, allowing the world to return to normal. The sky cleared, and the earth was safe, for now. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex stood alone in the vast, empty space, his chest heaving with exertion. The crystal in his chest had gone still, its power spent. For now, he had done what no one thought possible. He had stopped the alien fleet, saved Earth, and rewritten the fate of the galaxy. But he knew this was only the beginning. There were more threats out there, more challenges, and as long as the power of the crystal remained within him, he would be ready. He looked up at the stars, a deep sense of purpose settling over him. The galaxy had been forever changed, but so had he. Alex wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a guardian, a protector, and his journey was just beginning.